52-year-old professor falls for her 24-year-old student. What happened next destroyed everything. The university hallways were always busy in the mornings. Students rushed from one class to another, books in their arms, earbuds in their ears, and phones in their hands. Among the professors, one woman always stood out. Her name was Professor Laura Bennett. At 52 years old, she carried herself with dignity. She wore neat clothes, simple jewelry, and had a calm voice that commanded respect. Students often whispered about how strict she was, how she never tolerated late assignments, and how her classes were some of the most challenging. But they also admitted she was brilliant. She had spent 3 decades teaching, researching, and publishing work that was respected far beyond the university walls. Laura loved her work. She had given her life to education, sacrificing many personal joys along the way. While her friends married, raised families, or traveled the world, she spent most evenings with papers spread across her dining table, correcting essays, or preparing lectures. Her office shelves were stacked with books, and her students often joked that she lived more with Shakespeare, Plato, and history's great thinkers than with real people. But Laura did not mind. She believed knowledge was her calling, and she had chosen this path. In the new semester, a fresh group of students entered her advanced seminar. It was a small class, only 12 people, all handpicked because of their strong grades and passion for learning. Among them was a young man named Daniel. He was 24, tall, energetic, and always carried a notebook where he scribbled thoughts and questions. Unlike many students who only spoke when called upon, Daniel loved discussions. He raised his hand often, sometimes challenging her ideas, sometimes adding insights she had not expected from someone so young. His words were not perfect, but they were honest and full of curiosity. Laura noticed him almost immediately. Not in a personal way, but as a teacher notices a student with unusual spark. She had taught thousands of young people in her life, yet once in a while, a student came along who reminded her why she loved teaching. Daniel was one of those. He arrived early, sat near the front, and stayed after class to ask questions. At first, their talks were purely academic. He asked about books not on the syllabus, about theories that connected with today's world, and about her own research. She found herself enjoying these conversations, sometimes forgetting how late it had become. The other students also noticed Daniel's energy. Some admired him, others felt annoyed that he seemed to take so much of the professor's attention. But Laura kept her professional distance. She praised his ideas in class when deserved, but she also reminded him, as she reminded everyone, to listen and not to dominate. Yet deep inside, she began to feel something unusual, something she had not felt in years. She looked forward to his questions, to the way his eyes lit up when he understood something new, to the way he carried his books as if they were treasures. He reminded her of herself when she was young, full of passion and belief that knowledge could change the world. Daniel, on his side, admired her greatly. He had never seen anyone explain complex ideas with such clarity. While many professors seemed distant, Laura was both firm and approachable. He respected her discipline but also sensed kindness beneath it. To him, she was not just a teacher, but an example of what it meant to live fully for one's purpose. Slowly, admiration turned into something deeper. He began to notice how her eyes softened when she smiled, how she held her glasses when thinking, how her voice carried warmth even when she was serious. He did not speak of these thoughts, not even to his friends, but he carried them silently. Weeks passed. Their bond grew in small, almost invisible steps. A shared joke about a book. A long pause after class when neither wanted the conversation to end. A moment in the library when they both reached for the same volume and laughed. For Laura, these were innocent, yet she began to feel a quiet joy she had not known in years. For Daniel, every small exchange was meaningful, every word like a secret memory. Outside the classroom, Laura's life was quiet. She lived alone in a modest apartment not far from campus. She cooked simple meals, read in the evenings, and sometimes took long walks through the park. She often told herself she was content, yet there were nights when silence felt heavy, when the ticking of the clock reminded her of everything she had given up. She had been in relationships long ago, but none lasted. Her devotion to her career had always come first. Now, at 52, she rarely thought about love. She believed that chapter of life was closed for her. But meeting Daniel had stirred something she thought had been buried forever. One evening, after class, Daniel stayed behind again. They discussed a philosopher whose work was notoriously difficult. Daniel admitted he had read the same passage 5 times and still felt lost. Laura explained patiently, drawing examples from modern life. As she spoke, he listened intently, his notebook forgotten. When she finished, he said quietly, "No one has ever made me understand like you do." For a moment, Laura felt her heart move in a way that surprised her. She smiled, thanked him, and quickly gathered her papers to hide the strange feeling rising within. That night, she could not sleep. She told herself it was nothing. Just a student grateful to his teacher. But she also knew that gratitude had touched her more deeply than it should have. She thought about her age, about the responsibilities she carried, about how inappropriate it would be to let emotions cloud her judgment. Yet the thought of him lingered, no matter how much she tried to brush it aside. Meanwhile, Daniel began spending more time in the library, reading books she had mentioned. He wanted to impress her, not with shallow words, but by showing her that he valued the knowledge she offered. He started writing essays longer than required, with references that surprised even her. When she returned his papers with comments, he read them carefully, treasuring her handwriting in the margins. He felt seen, guided, and valued in a way no one else in his life had given him. Soon, other students began whispering. They noticed how often Daniel stayed behind after class, how the professor's eyes seemed softer when speaking to him. The whispers were light-hearted at first, but in a university, rumors grew quickly. Laura sensed it but ignored it, convincing herself that nothing wrong was happening. Yet in the quiet of her apartment, she wondered why she cared so much about one student, why her heart seemed to skip when she saw him walking toward her office. As the semester moved forward, their connection deepened in ways neither had planned. It was not a sudden storm, but a slow, quiet unfolding. Laura found herself waiting for his questions, his laughter, his thoughtful silence. Daniel, in turn, felt drawn not just to her mind but to her presence. He admired her strength, her years of wisdom, and the dignity with which she carried herself. What began as mentorship was becoming something else, something neither dared to name. Part 1 of their story was not about scandal or chaos. It was about two people from different generations, bound by knowledge and curiosity, who slowly found in each other something they had both been missing. For Laura, it was the reminder that life could still surprise her. For Daniel, it was the discovery that admiration could grow into something far more powerful. The seeds of what would later unfold were planted quietly, in classrooms, libraries, and unspoken moments, where two lives began to change forever. The semester carried on, and the days at the university grew colder as autumn settled in. Students bundled themselves in sweaters and scarves, but inside the classroom, the air remained warm with the energy of discussions and ideas. For Professor Laura Bennett, the weeks seemed to pass faster than usual. She had taught many classes in her long career, but this one felt different. Every lecture left her more thoughtful, every discussion seemed alive. A large part of that feeling came from Daniel, the young student whose curiosity never seemed to rest. It began subtly. Daniel started waiting outside her office with questions that stretched beyond the syllabus. Sometimes he brought articles from journals, sometimes news stories, and sometimes his own written notes. He was not trying to impress her with flattery, instead, he seemed genuinely hungry to learn. Laura admired that quality, for it reminded her of herself when she was his age. Yet she also felt a quiet pull inside her heart, something she tried not to acknowledge. She told herself she was simply doing her duty as a professor, guiding a bright student. Still, there were moments when her own thoughts betrayed her, and she felt emotions she had not allowed herself in decades. Their conversations after class became longer. What started as a 10-minute clarification turned into half an hour, then an hour. They laughed more often. Sometimes they drifted from academic talk into small pieces of personal life, books she loved as a child, his memories of growing up in a small town, the reason he chose this university. These exchanges seemed innocent, but they planted roots of familiarity. Laura found herself sharing things she rarely spoke about, such as how she had once dreamed of traveling through Europe, or how she sometimes regretted missing out on family life. Daniel listened with genuine attention, nodding, asking thoughtful questions, as if every detail mattered. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself drawn to her in ways he had not expected. At first, he had admired her intellect and patience. But now, he admired her strength, her wisdom, even the way she carried herself with calm dignity. When she smiled, it gave him a sense of warmth he did not find anywhere else. He began to compare her presence with that of his friends, and the difference was striking. His friends joked about shallow things, but with her, every word felt meaningful. Slowly, admiration turned into something deeper, something that lived in silence but grew stronger with every passing day. The line between teacher and student was still intact, but it began to blur in small ways. Daniel started noticing her habits. He saw how she pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose when thinking, how she tapped her pen lightly on the desk when waiting for answers, how she paused before giving praise. He began to read not only her words but her gestures. Laura noticed his attentiveness too. Sometimes she caught his eyes lingering, not in disrespect, but in a way that carried unspoken thoughts. When she did, she looked away quickly, reminding herself of the rules she could not cross. The whispers among classmates grew louder. Some students joked that Daniel was the professor's favorite. Others teased him lightly, asking if he was planning to write his thesis just to impress her. Daniel brushed off these comments, but deep down he knew there was truth in his dedication. Laura heard the whispers too, but she tried to ignore them. She told herself that every semester had its rumors, that young students often exaggerated. Still, she felt uneasy knowing others had begun to notice. One afternoon, Daniel asked if she could recommend books beyond the course. Instead of listing titles in class, she invited him to her office so she could show him directly. Her office was a place few students saw. The shelves were packed with decades of books, papers, and memories. As he stepped inside, Daniel looked around with wide eyes. "It feels like a world of its own," he said softly. Laura smiled and handed him a book she loved deeply, explaining how it had shaped her thinking when she was young. Their hands brushed for a brief second as he took it, and though it meant nothing in action, both felt a pause in their hearts. She quickly returned to her desk, pretending to look for another book, while he opened the one she had given, as if it were something rare. From that day, Daniel began visiting her office more often. He borrowed books, returned them with notes inside, and asked her what she thought of his reflections. Sometimes he brought her coffee from the campus cafe, saying he thought she might need it during her long hours. She smiled politely, but inside, those small gestures touched her more than she admitted. She had spent years in solitude, with little kindness shown to her outside of professional respect. Now, suddenly, someone remembered her likes and dislikes, someone cared if she was tired, someone noticed her beyond the role of professor. As winter approached, the days grew shorter. One evening, after a long seminar, the two of them walked out of the building together. Snow had begun to fall lightly, covering the ground in a thin layer of white. Students rushed past them, laughing and throwing snowballs, But Laura and Daniel walked slowly. He carried her bag, despite her protest, and they talked about nothing in particular: the weather, the holiday season, the way the campus looked under snow. Yet in those small exchanges, something unspoken hung in the air. Daniel wanted to say more, to tell her how much she mattered to him, but he stayed silent. Laura, too, felt the weight of the moment, but she reminded herself that boundaries must not be crossed. Still, when they parted ways, she went home with a smile she could not explain. At night, Laura found herself thinking about him. She thought of his energy, his laughter, his determination. She thought of how alive she felt when they spoke, how much lighter the world seemed. She also thought of the dangers. She knew her reputation, her career, her principles all could be shattered if she allowed herself to step beyond her role. But no matter how much she reminded herself, the thoughts of him returned, stubborn and persistent. Daniel, lying in his small apartment, thought of her too. He wondered if she ever thought of him beyond the classroom, if she felt even a fraction of what he felt. His heart told him yes, but his mind warned him no. The bond between them deepened in ways invisible to others. It was not marked by grand gestures, but by moments: a shared smile, a thoughtful pause, a question answered with patience. Their relationship was still that of teacher and student, yet beneath it, emotions had begun to take root. Neither of them spoke of it, but both felt it. And though they tried to resist, the pull of connection grew stronger with each day. The second chapter of their story was not about scandal or exposure yet. It was about quiet closeness, about two people learning more about each other and themselves. Laura discovered feelings she thought she had buried forever, while Daniel discovered the depth of admiration that could become something powerful. They stood at the edge of something unknown, a place where rules and emotions collided. Neither knew what the future held, but both knew that something had already changed inside them. Their lives were no longer the same as before, and the path ahead was becoming more complicated with every passing moment. The new year began with a fresh semester, and the air on campus was filled with excitement. Students returned after the break, sharing stories of holidays and family gatherings. Professors prepared new lessons, and life at the university continued with its usual rhythm. But for Laura and Daniel, things no longer felt ordinary. Their connection had grown quietly during the past months, and though they had never spoken about it openly, both could feel its weight. It was no longer just the bond of teacher and student. There was an invisible thread between them that neither dared to cut. In the classroom, Laura kept her professional face. She lectured with her usual clarity, asked sharp questions, and corrected assignments with fairness. Yet when her eyes met Daniel's, there was always a flicker of something unspoken. Sometimes she caught herself pausing longer than she should, or smiling when he made a clever remark. She told herself to be careful, to remain the professional she had always been. But emotions, once awakened, are not so easy to silence. Daniel, meanwhile, tried to stay composed. He answered questions, participated in discussions, and interacted with his classmates as usual. But his attention often drifted to her. He admired her more deeply now, not only for her knowledge but for her resilience. He had noticed how she carried herself even when tired, how she maintained dignity even when facing criticism from colleagues. To him, she was more than a professor, she was someone extraordinary. His admiration was no longer hidden in notebooks or private thoughts. It showed in the way he leaned forward to listen, the way his tone softened when speaking to her, the way his eyes followed her when she moved around the classroom. Rumors began to spread more boldly now. A few classmates joked openly about him being the star student or her favorite. One girl remarked during a group discussion, "If Professor Bennett praises you one more time, Daniel, we'll all start taking notes from you instead of her." The room filled with laughter, but Laura felt her cheeks warm. She quickly redirected the conversation back to the lesson, but inside, she knew the whispers were growing louder. Academic environments were small worlds, stories traveled fast, and even the smallest details became fuel for gossip. One afternoon, after class ended, Laura stayed behind to finish grading papers. Daniel lingered too, pretending to look through his notes. When the last student left, he walked up to her desk. "Professor, do you ever get tired of people's opinions?" he asked softly. She looked at him, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask?" she said. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Because people talk too much. About me. About you. About things they don't understand." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Laura sighed. "Yes, people always talk. That's something you can't control. What matters is how you carry yourself." But as she said it, her heart raced. She realized that if people were already talking, the line between them was thinner than she thought. The following weeks only made things more complicated. Daniel began to help her with small tasks, carrying heavy books, setting up equipment before class, even fetching tea when she had long hours. She tried to refuse, but his kindness made it difficult. "It's no trouble," he always said with a smile. These gestures did not go unnoticed. Other faculty members raised their eyebrows, and some even asked quietly if she was giving him special treatment. Laura denied it firmly, but she felt the ground beneath her becoming unsteady. One evening, the faculty organized a public lecture by a visiting scholar. The hall was filled with professors, students, and guests. Laura attended as part of the organizing committee. Daniel came too, eager to hear the speaker. During the event, they sat apart, careful not to draw attention. But when the lecture ended, they found themselves walking out of the hall at the same time. The night was cold, and Daniel offered her his scarf. She refused, saying she would be fine, but he gently draped it around her shoulders anyway. For a brief moment, they stood close under the glow of the campus lights, surrounded by people yet caught in their own quiet world. A colleague walking past noticed them and gave a knowing look. Laura's heart sank. She realized that even the smallest act of kindness could now be twisted into suspicion. The turning point came when a message meant only for Daniel ended up in the wrong hands. Laura had sent him an article link late at night, with a short note saying, "I thought of you when I read this. It matches your argument from class today." To her, it was harmless, but to others, the phrasing could suggest more than it intended. Somehow, the message was seen by another student, and within days, whispers turned into louder accusations. "She's too close to him," people said. "Something is going on." Laura tried to ignore it, but she knew the damage had begun. Daniel, frustrated by the growing tension, confronted her one afternoon in her office. "Why do we have to pretend nothing is happening?" he asked, his voice low but intense. "Why can't we admit that we care for each other?" Laura froze. Her heart wanted to agree, but her mind screamed against it. "Because this is dangerous," she said firmly. "Do you understand what I would lose? My career, my reputation, everything I've built over 30 years. And you would be marked forever as the student who crossed the line. It's not worth it." Daniel looked at her with pain in his eyes. "But it already feels real," he whispered. She turned away, unable to face him, knowing he was right but also knowing she could not let herself fall further. Still, no matter how much she resisted, the bond between them refused to fade. They began to meet outside the university, at first by chance, then by choice. A quiet cafe on the edge of town. A bookstore where no one from campus usually went. Long walks in the park where they spoke freely, away from watching eyes. Their conversations grew more personal. She told him about her childhood dreams, about the sacrifices she had made. He told her about his fears, his ambitions, his feeling of being misunderstood by people his age. With each exchange, their connection deepened. They felt seen, valued, and understood in ways they had not experienced before. But the outside world did not remain silent. Faculty members began to question her judgment. Students whispered more boldly. Once, during a lecture, Laura caught two students passing a note and laughing. Though she never knew what it said, she felt certain it was about her and Daniel. The tension in the room became unbearable. What had started as admiration and mentorship was now under the shadow of suspicion, and it threatened to destroy the life she had worked so hard to protect. By the end of the semester, the situation had reached a breaking point. What had begun as a quiet bond had now become a subject of open speculation. The university was a place of rules, and any hint of misconduct, even without proof, could bring consequences. Laura lay awake at night, torn between her heart and her responsibilities. She knew she cared for Daniel in ways she should not. She knew he felt the same. And she knew the path they were on could only lead to disaster. Yet despite all this, she could not let go. The heart had already spoken, and it refused to be silenced by reason. The third part of their story was a storm waiting to break. Emotions had deepened, whispers had turned into warnings, and the thin wall of secrecy was beginning to crack. Laura and Daniel stood at the edge of a choice, either to step back and protect everything they had, or to step forward and risk losing it all. For now, they lingered in the middle, caught between what they wanted and what they feared, knowing that one day soon, everything would change. The spring semester began with an uneasy calm. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Students filled the lecture halls, professors carried on with their routines, and the university buzzed with the usual activity. But beneath the ordinary rhythm, the whispers about Laura and Daniel had grown louder. What once had been small, quiet comments now spread like wildfire across the campus. Some students claimed they had seen them walking together late in the evening. Others spoke of overheard conversations, of lingering looks, of signs that something was happening beyond the classroom. Whether these stories were true or not, the rumors had taken on a life of their own. Laura tried to hold her ground. She carried herself with the same dignity she always had, arriving on time, giving her lectures with precision, and grading with fairness. Yet she felt the weight of eyes on her wherever she went. Colleagues who had once greeted her warmly now offered short nods, their expressions filled with doubt. A few faculty members asked subtle questions that were not really questions at all. Is everything all right in your class? Or I've heard your student Daniel is very talented. You must spend a lot of time guiding him. Each word carried hidden meaning. Laura knew what they were implying, and it cut into her heart. Daniel, on his side, was less skilled at hiding his feelings. He had never been good at pretending. His admiration for Laura was written in his tone, in the way he defended her ideas during debates, in the way he followed her guidance more closely than anyone else. His classmates noticed and spoke about it more openly now. Some were jealous, some amused, and some simply curious. But all of it fed the growing storm. The breaking point came when an email, meant to be private, was forwarded by mistake. Laura had written to Daniel late one evening, sharing comments on his research draft. At the end of the message, without thinking, she had written a line too personal: "You always push me to think more deeply, I value that." It was not a declaration of anything improper, but in the eyes of others, it was enough to suggest closeness. Somehow, the email was seen by another student, and within days, it reached the dean's office. What had once been whispers was now an official concern. Laura was called into a private meeting. She sat in a polished wooden office across from the dean, a man who had worked beside her for years. His voice was calm but firm as he explained the situation. "There are concerns about your relationship with a student," he said. "I am not accusing you of wrongdoing, but the perception alone is damaging. The university cannot ignore this." Laura felt her stomach tighten. She explained that her interactions with Daniel were about mentorship, about guiding a talented student. But even as she spoke, She knew her words sounded weaker against the heavy shadow of suspicion. The dean listened, nodded politely, and ended with a warning, "Be careful, Professor Bennett. This institution values its reputation above all." When she returned home that evening, Laura sat alone in her quiet apartment. The walls seemed to close in around her. For 30 years she had worked tirelessly, sacrificing her personal life, dedicating every ounce of energy to her profession. And now, because of feelings she had not even fully acted upon, her career stood at risk. She thought of Daniel, of his bright eyes and earnest questions, of how alive he made her feel. She wondered if it was worth everything she could lose. Daniel sensed her distress. When he came to see her the next day, she told him about the meeting with the dean. His face grew pale. "They can't punish you for this," he said angrily. "We haven't done anything wrong." But Laura shook her head. "It doesn't matter what is true," she replied softly. "It matters what people believe. Perception can destroy as much as reality." Daniel clenched his fists. "Then let's tell the truth," he said. "Let's stop hiding." She looked at him with sadness. "If we tell the truth, I will lose everything. And you will carry this with you forever." The room fell into silence. Both of them knew there was no easy answer. As the weeks passed, the tension became unbearable. Faculty meetings grew colder, students whispered louder, and even friends avoided her. Some who had once admired her now looked at her as if she had broken a sacred trust. Laura kept teaching, but the joy she once felt was slipping away. Her lectures felt heavier, her words more forced. Even Daniel noticed the change. He watched as the woman who had once been his greatest inspiration slowly shrank under the weight of judgment. The scandal grew when a photograph surfaced. A student had taken a picture of Laura and Daniel sitting together at a small cafe off campus. They were not holding hands, nor doing anything inappropriate, but the sight of them sitting close, speaking with warmth, was enough to fuel the fire. The photo spread quickly among students and eventually reached faculty inboxes. It became the proof many had been waiting for, even though it proved nothing. The university board now had reason to investigate. Laura was suspended temporarily while the investigation took place. The news hit her like a storm. She had spent her life building a reputation of integrity, and now she was forced to step aside while strangers examined her every action. Daniel felt guilty, blaming himself for everything. He tried to defend her, telling anyone who would listen that she was innocent, that she was only doing her job as a mentor. But his words carried little weight against the tide of gossip. During this time, Laura withdrew into herself. She stayed home, curtains drawn, books unopened. The silence that once felt peaceful now felt suffocating. She questioned her choices, her feelings, and the path that had led her here. She wondered if she had been selfish, if she had let her heart wander when she should have been stronger. She wondered if she had ruined not only her own life but Daniel's as well. Daniel, however, refused to let her fade. He visited her apartment, bringing food, books, and words of encouragement. He reminded her of the lives she had touched, the students she had inspired, the knowledge she had given to the world. He told her that no matter what happened, she mattered. His loyalty moved her deeply, yet it also broke her heart. She knew he was sacrificing his own peace for her, and she feared he would regret it one day. The investigation dragged on for weeks, and the strain grew heavier. Faculty members distanced themselves further, students whispered louder, and the pressure from the administration grew sharper. Laura knew that no matter the outcome, her life at the university would never be the same. Even if she was cleared, the stain of suspicion would linger forever. And if she was found guilty, her career would end completely. The once bright world of ideas and learning had turned into a battlefield of judgment and fear. What had begun as a connection filled with inspiration and warmth had now become the center of a storm that threatened to destroy everything. Laura stood at the edge of a decision whether to fight for her place, risking more pain, or to let go of the life she had built. Daniel stood with her, ready to face the consequences, but both of them knew that whatever choice they made, nothing would ever return to the way it once was. This part of their story was no longer about quiet admiration or secret connection. It was about exposure, about the cruel light of gossip and suspicion, about how quickly a lifetime of respect could crumble. For Laura, it was the beginning of the end of her career. For Daniel, it was the heavy burden of loving someone the world said he should not. And for both, it was the realization that feelings, once hidden, had now become the force that could destroy everything they had ever known. The weeks after the suspension were some of the hardest days Laura had ever lived through. The university she had served for decades now felt like a closed door. Every morning, she woke up and looked at the stack of books on her desk, reminders of the lectures she used to prepare. But instead of filling classrooms with her voice, she now sat in silence, waiting for the investigation committee's decision. The woman who had once been proud, respected, and admired now felt as if her life's work had been reduced to a single rumor. She wondered often if this was how all stories ended, not with celebration but with quiet ruin. Daniel refused to let her face it all alone. Every day, he came to see her, bringing groceries, hot coffee, or simply his company. He spoke about classes, about small things happening on campus, about the research he continued to work on. He wanted to keep her connected to the world she loved, but he also wanted her to know she was not forgotten. Laura appreciated his efforts, but she also worried. She worried that his loyalty would cost him friendships, opportunities, and perhaps even his future. Sometimes she told him to stop visiting so often, to think of himself. But Daniel only smiled and said, "You've given me so much, Professor. This is the least I can do." News of the investigation spread beyond the university. Local papers wrote short articles about it, hinting at scandal but never telling the full truth. For many who read, the details did not matter. What mattered was the headline, and the headline was enough to damage reputations. Laura felt the sting of betrayal from people she had once called friends. Some stopped answering her calls, others avoided her completely. It was as though her decades of hard work had been erased by a few lines of gossip. She tried to stay strong, but in the quiet of her apartment, she often cried, remembering the life she had built and the way it was slipping away. When the committee finally delivered its decision, it came not as a relief but as a crushing blow. Laura was asked to resign quietly in exchange for avoiding public disgrace. They offered her retirement benefits but made it clear that her reputation at the university would not recover if she stayed. She had two choices: fight publicly and risk humiliation, or step away quietly and let the matter fade. Laura read the letter several times, her hands trembling. 30 years of teaching, publishing, and guiding students all reduced to this choice. She sat with Daniel that evening and told him the news. His face tightened with anger. "You should fight this," he said firmly. "You've done nothing wrong. You've given your whole life to this place. They can't just throw you away." Laura listened quietly and then shook her head. "Daniel, I don't have the strength for a war. Even if I fight, the damage is already done. My name will never be the same here." Her eyes glistened with tears, but her voice stayed steady. "Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let go." Daniel reached for her hand. "Then let's start again somewhere else. You don't have to stay here. We can leave this behind." His words were filled with hope, but Laura's heart sank. She admired his courage, but she also knew the reality. She was 52, with roots deep in the city, while he was only 24, his life just beginning. "You have a future ahead of you," she said softly. "You can't tie yourself to my ending." Daniel shook his head fiercely. "You're not an ending. You're everything that matters to me." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of the rain outside. Laura resigned from the university a week later. Her departure was quiet, without ceremony, without speeches. She cleared out her office, packed her books, and walked through the empty hallways one last time. Memories flooded her with every step: the lectures she had given, the students she had guided, the late nights preparing lessons. It felt like leaving a part of her soul behind. Some faculty members sent short messages of farewell, but many remained silent. Her exit was treated as if she had done something shameful, though the truth was more complicated. She left not because of guilt but because of the heavy shadow of suspicion. Life outside the university was strange. For the first time in decades, Laura woke up without a class to teach, without a schedule to follow. The silence in her home grew heavier, even with Daniel's visits. She tried to fill her days with reading, writing, and long walks, but there was always an emptiness inside her. Teaching had not just been her job, it had been her identity. Without it, she felt adrift, uncertain of who she was anymore. Daniel, however, remained determined to stay by her side. He continued his studies but spent most of his free time with her. They visited parks, museums, and quiet cafes, trying to build a world away from judgmental eyes. For a while, it worked. They found peace in small moments, sharing a book, cooking together, talking late into the night. Yet beneath the surface, they both felt the weight of reality. Their ages, their roles, the difference in where they stood in life, it all lingered, even when unspoken. Slowly, cracks began to appear. Daniel's friends drifted away, unable to understand his choices. Opportunities that once seemed open to him became harder to reach, as whispers of the scandal followed him too. Laura saw this and it broke her heart. She wanted him to soar, to live fully, to chase his dreams without limits. But instead, she saw him tying himself to her, defending her, sacrificing parts of his own future. The more she loved him, the more she realized she could not let him continue this path. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Laura finally spoke the words she had been holding back. "Daniel," she said gently, "you deserve more than this. You deserve a life without shadows, without whispers. I can't give you that." Daniel turned to her quickly, his eyes filled with pain. "Don't say that. You're all I want." But Laura shook her head. "No. You think that now, but one day you will look back and wonder what you gave up. I can't be the reason you lose your future." Her voice broke as she said it, but her heart knew it was the truth. Daniel argued, pleaded, tried to convince her otherwise, but deep down, he knew she was right. He loved her, but love alone could not erase the world's judgment, nor could it give back the years between them. They sat together in silence, knowing that this moment was the beginning of the end. The choice was not about lack of love but about sacrifice, about protecting each other from further pain. In the weeks that followed, they drifted apart. Daniel threw himself into his studies, determined to build the future she wanted for him. Laura began to write privately, turning her experiences into words that only her journals would hold. They met less often, then rarely, until their lives moved in separate directions. Yet the memory of their time together lingered in both of them, a memory filled with warmth, pain, and lessons that would never fade. Years later, Laura would look back on that chapter of her life with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. It had destroyed her career, her reputation, and the world she had built. But it had also reminded her that even after decades of solitude, the heart could still feel deeply, still yearn, still awaken. For Daniel, the experience shaped him in ways he could not forget. He carried her lessons not only as a student but as someone who had once shared a bond that defied rules. It made him stronger, wiser, and more determined to live authentically, no matter the cost. Their story did not end with happily ever after. It ended with loss, with sacrifice, with the quiet pain of letting go. But it was also a story of truth, of connection, of the fragile beauty of human hearts. It was a reminder that sometimes, love can arrive when least expected, and sometimes, it can cost everything. For Laura and Daniel, what happened next had indeed destroyed much of what they had known, but it had also left behind a truth neither could deny, that even in ruin, their bond had been real, and it would live in them forever.